And we're on to our final keynote of Forward 50 2021. At the first Forward 50, on the first stage, Pia got up to talk. 3 years later, she delivered so much amazing content that she actually lost her voice. Forward 50 is not Forward 50 without Pia Andrews. So we thought it was only fitting to close out this fantastic week with Pia. A self-described serial public sector transformer, Pia is going to tackle one of the biggest challenges in progressive civil society today: trust. To talk about making public services trustworthy in the digital age, and fresh off Channel 4 from her fantastic workshop, please welcome the incredible Pia Andrews.
Hey, oh gosh, thank you. Hey.
Can you tell we love you?
Anyway, I'm feeling the love.
It is fantastic to see you. I'm going to get right out of your way. I can't hear what you have to say.
Look, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone. And gosh, what an introduction. I don't even know how to follow that. But let me dive in with something I'm extremely passionate about, and that I know that all of you will be passionate about as well, which is, how do we be the public service that the people need us to be, particularly amidst all the change and crazy and difficulties and challenges, not just now, but into the future? So the first thing I thought I'd do is just share a couple of fun little pictures that I was putting together recently for a group here in New Zealand. Trust is something that it affects people every day. Trust is not an option. It is something very practical. You know, pure organic goods for sale. You know, we ask ourselves, how do we know if this is true? You see stuff on videos all the time. You know, babies should be taxed. Is this real? Is it fake? Buy genuine goods here today. How do I know what's genuine? We're getting hammered every day, all the time. Join this forum, buy this stuff, do this test, post some photos, join today. How do we know if we're being gamed online? How do we know if we're being misdirected? How do we know anything? We're increasingly using robots and software and IoT. How do we know whether the sensors data has been tampered with? How do we know if the bots have been tampered with? How do we know from cable to cloud to apps and beyond if all aspects of the infrastructure that we're using is high veracity, is trustworthy, is assured? And finally, of course, we get a lot of services where, quite frankly, computer says no, and we don't know why. Why aren't I eligible for the help that I need? How do I appeal? How do I know whether the decision was made in the right way? We have a lot of very practical means of knowing whether we're trustworthy or not, but the impact is a very profound one for people. So trust isn't optional, especially for public services. This is a quote from Mensa Canada from a few years back. Trust is the currency of business. Companies which provide context, ensure transparency, and maintain auditability for their AI systems and algorithms will prosper. These companies will create intelligent AI and in turn gain their customers' trust. Now, of course, that expands directly to government, and the opposite is true too. People trust government as much as their worst experience. This is an important thing to understand, because if your department is doing something great, is providing a great service, a trustworthy service, is providing, you know, all of the transparency and accountability and appealability, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But if their next experience with another department is awful, or they don't understand why their kids were taken away, or they don't understand why they didn't get that service that they absolutely needed, then their trust in government as a whole will actually suffer. So this isn't about just your department or just your service or just your policy. We have to collectively have trustworthy government so that people can trust all of us. Because people's trust in government isn't just about their trust in our services or our policies. It's actually about their perceived legitimacy of everything that we do. And what does government do? Well, we don't just provide stuff. We also administer democracy. And when people's trust in the public sector erodes, their trust in democracy erodes. Here in New Zealand, the public trust in the parliament and the fourth estate, in the media, is plummeting. And yet those are two absolutely critical parts of a functional democracy. So we can't sort of say, well, if my service has, is doing well, then we're all okay. We need to think about the situation as a whole. And we need to also think about the key principle of our public services is, administrative law. How do we ensure administrative law and the principles of and the practices of in a digital age? It's one of the key things I'm going to talk about a little bit today. What are the preconditions for trustworthy AI, trustworthy gov generally? I would suggest would be traceability, appealability, auditability, and the concept of do no harm. But traceability requires something to trace to. If you can't say this is based on this legal, on this piece of legislation, on this piece of regulation, on this policy, then you don't know if it's true or not. Appealability requires an accessible record to appeal. If you don't record the decision, record the action at that point in time, combined with the information about the decision, the basis upon it was made, the person or people about which it was made at the time, and if those people can't get access to that record of decision, then how can they appeal it? Auditing requires real-time monitoring, real-time escalation, not just of this particular thing or that thing, but also of patterns. And doing no harm actually requires measuring for harm, measuring quality of life, not just saying, well, I've got a high CX score and it's a high performing or service according to however you want to measure performance. It needs to actually measure for quality of life, measure for harm. You need to be measuring for the impact on real people, not just the organizational or policy objectives that you have. So the key principle I would suggest that we all need to shift our mind to is, rather than asking for trust, we need to start being trustworthy. I'll share just a quick story for you. A few years back, I ran a session in another government actually about data and about sharing data and about federated data, and it was a big data conversation. But we were talking about what the different departments, and it was a whole of government conversation, were doing. And they all sort of said, oh, well, here's my policy and here's my practice. And I said, you know what, let's do a little exercise. I want you to all just pretend to just be just a person, a normal person for a moment. And I want you to think about your family and your, kids or partners or parents. And I'm going to ask you, if I wanted your data, your personal data, and I said to you, I'm going to provide you a better service, but I want your data to do it, what would it take for you as a person, as an individual, to trust me? And we went around the room and they said lots and lots of things. I'd need to know how the data is being used. I'd need to know it's not being sold on to third parties. I'd need to know that it was protected. Some people got a little technical, but generally speaking, people said all the things that you would expect. I need to know that there's a bit of independent assurance and oversight. And then we came back to the room and said, okay, so what are all your departments doing? And they said everything they're doing. And I just pointed out, you realize that none of the things you said your departments are doing correspond to the things you said as a citizen, as a person, that you would need to see. And the room went deathly silent. And several very senior people just said, I've never thought about it that way. By dehumanizing our workplace, we've actually removed our own empathy to our own environment. And by treating the public service as something separate to society, we're actually removing some of those opportunities to operate in a way that is acceptable to our society. So actually being really humane and human in our jobs is actually one of the, a good enabler for trustworthiness. So it comes down to accountability and transparency and participatory and, all kinds of things. I'm going to jump forward a couple of things, but here's a couple of questions you can ask. If you can answer these questions, then you're probably on the right track. How would you audit in real time and proactively a decision? How would a citizen appeal a decision or a person appeal a decision? How would you know whether something's having a negative effect on people? And finally, and this is critical, what do people need from you to be considered trustworthy? Because it's not just about, doing one survey and finding out what people like and then applying that across government. It is actually contextual. What people need from the police will probably be different to what they need from fisheries, will probably be different from what they need from ESDC, will probably be different to what they need from immigration. So actually understanding the context of your organization and of the relationship that people have to you and what it would take for them to trust you is really critical. And we need to intentionally avoid unintentionally dropping empathy. So this is also about understanding that it's not just about humans versus machines. There's a lot of automation going on. We need to keep humans in the picture. We need to have an augmented rather than an automated workforce so we can get the best of both worlds. So I think there are 4 key pillars to 21st century trust infrastructure and to trusted government. And I'm going to run through each of these just fairly quickly, but there's a lot of opportunities to discuss this. So first of all, around traceability and accountability. And each one of these, I'll share just a short story. There's a friend of mine works in government and has for 30 years in policy, but lives in a very small town. And because it's a small town, everyone knows that she works in government, and if anyone has any issues, they talk to her about it. So she was having coffee with an elderly, quite religious Pacifica woman, and the woman was just saying, "Oh, well, that liver transplant I applied for, yeah, I didn't get it, but that's okay. God has given me a good life. I'm at peace with that." My friend said, "Maybe they got it wrong." And this woman said, "But no, they wouldn't get it wrong. They're the government. They don't get things wrong." And my friend said, "Well, let's give it a go. Let's just appeal the decision and just see. Let's just find out why you weren't eligible." And over the next sort of few weeks or month or so, they went through the process and together. And lo and behold, she was actually eligible. There had been a mistake. She got her liver transplant, and she's still alive today. And she goes around saying, "Oh, my friend is the reason she's still alive." But conversely, because a lot of people that get an answer from government wouldn't even think to question it, this isn't just a nice to have. This is, genuinely a matter of life and death in some cases. So thinking about how to have traceability, how to have accountability, how to ensure that every decision made is captured with the rationale, and that rationale is communicated to people. Because in some cases, it's because there's a mistake on the government side. On some cases, it's because the data that we have access to is not the most up-to-date data. Some cases, the person has provided the incorrect information themselves. But in any case, every time we make a decision, if we make the rationale and reasons for those decisions available back to the person, they can at least validate, check, or appeal it if indeed it's wrong for some reason. We need to be able to make sure that there's a line of sight back to lawful basis upon which the decision was made, which is where regulation and legislation as code becomes so critical. And we need to capture those decisions as a record and have that ease of access. The other thing is we need independent oversight. I've seen a lot of departments who sort of say, well, all of their governance is internal. Actually getting external people involved in your governance is so critical, because otherwise you have a systemic motivation to just to do what is good for the organization rather than what is more broadly good. So it's absolutely critical to make sure that your assurance processes actually involves other people. Human outcomes, if you are not measuring, monitoring, and valuing, and therefore prioritizing humane outcomes from your systems, processes, decisions, services, etc., you run the risk of a financial imperative being put above a human imperative. So it's absolutely critical to put in place human measurement systems. So in New South Wales, there's a thing called the Human Services Outcomes Framework. In New Zealand, we have the Wellbeing Framework. But identifying and measuring holistically for human measures is absolutely critical. We need to understand that machines are users and plan for this. You may be a little surprised to hear that each one of these faces has been automatically generated from software. And here we go. Look, this is all software generated peoples. These are not, these can interact in real time, and these are the sort of things that we're facing. The person that you're dealing with online may or may not be a real person. And the person that anyone's dealing with online may or may not be a real person. So we need to plan for and assume that machines are users in our policies, in our services, in everything we do. But we also need to support our communities to be able to navigate this world. Deepfakes can create videos of literally anyone saying and doing literally anything. And the impact of that's going to be profound, because it hasn't hit us yet, but it's going to hit us at the next election. It's going to hit us moving forward when people are starting to be held to ransom for fake videos of them in compromising positions. It's going to get very uncomfortable very quickly as a society. So we need to plan for and support not just machines as users in our own context. We need to look at what could or should the role be of government in supporting people to navigate this very complex and difficult world. And finally, the final pillar, and it is as important as any of the others, even though it's not technical, is to build safe and ethically motivated teams. Build the capacity, the confidence, the culture, minimize urgency so people have the time and space to be their best selves at work and to bring their humanity to their work. and really try to always remember that the general public see the government as both the social worker and the cop. So we need to check our privilege. We need to proactively address power imbalances, and we need to build into our business as usual all of the mechanisms that people can say, you know what, this isn't ethically right. This isn't based on my values. This doesn't seem to align with the values of the people that we serve. This is driving the wrong sort of outcome. So getting safe and ethically motivated teams, getting the social infrastructure in government to support trustworthy government is as important as anything else. Servant leadership is a critical enabler to that, as many of you know. But the final thing is openness. Working openly is the most critical thing to do. The more openly we work, and this doesn't mean better comms and better, marketing and better media releases. This actually means real public servants at every level being able to engage with the public, with their peers, with their profession. The more that we work in the open, the more that we can be seen to be holding ourselves to account, and the more we in reality hold ourselves to account. So working in the open, having peer review, and building public trust in us as public servants is as important as anything else. And there's some strategies and techniques and ideas there, but seeing ourselves again as part of society, not separate from it, and holding ourselves to account to that will dramatically assist in people being able to see us as trustworthy, not just for what we do, but for how we work. So a quick reminder, if all of this sounds a bit too big, too hard, too bold, please remember we invented this. Please remember we can reinvent it. And please remember, if you don't, if we don't, if public servants don't make the public service better, who will? So I'll leave it there. I hope that's given you some food for thought, and I'll leave you just with the challenge and the plea to consider how you can dramatically improve and engage with the public for more trustworthy practices, services, approaches, technologies, and cultures in the public service, so that we can be fit for purpose in the digital age. Thank you so much.
Thank you, as always, Pia. We have a couple of comments and questions, although I think most people have their brains fairly full right now after your workshop. But I would like to paraphrase one of the questions that's in here. Someone talking about, going through a complex Byzantine process and then having to just give up and say, why not just start again? Which is obviously what you were saying, that our trust in government is only as good as our worst experience. Do you have thoughts about the idea of auditability or transparency or dashboards? And I know you and I have talked about this idea of a sort of life log of the journeys the user is on. It still seems like that's so far away. What's stopping us?
Well, and this is the interesting thing. It would not be hard to. I think everyone tries to build massive systems, and they try to start from a requirements-based approach to I've got to design the perfect thing. If we had, and it would not be hard to develop, I've designed a couple of these already. If you design almost like a citizen's ledger, a means of saying every time a decision of this type is made, we're just going to capture these three things: who it's about, what the decision was, and on what basis the decision was made. It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to have a 10-year standards development process to do that. Create a citizen's ledger. Make it immutable. This is one of the actual helpful use cases of blockchain, I think, because then people can trust that it's not been tampered with if it's immutable, right? But then, and the banks are doing this right now, and then you can sign it with a person's, identity, or a person's, you can basically tag it to a person. So what the banks are doing now is every transaction that relates to you has an association with you, and then you can look at the chain, but you're just seeing the ones associated to you. And if every department writes to that ledger, right, then you've now got a single view of every decision about you. Doesn't need to solve every other problem, just that one.
You can then say, we're going to label some of these. So this could be #healthcare or whatever. And if you get it wrong, well, it's still a start. And eventually you get these emergent standards where like #health is a dominant one, and let's just use that. So there is a certain amount of paving the cow paths that can be done here, where you put it out there and see what it gets used for, and then start to augment it in that way.
And the other thing is building it into your service design. If your service design isn't just a person can complete this check, if the service design includes the principle, and if the digital service standard includes the requirement that every time a decision is made or a service is provided, the rationale for that service is provided at the same time, if that's part of the the requirement for all services, that's actually a fairly simple thing to do without any new infrastructure.
It wasn't easy for people to quit their country. You were born there and that's where you lived, and that was the citizenship you were given. I was chatting with Tim Boomer earlier, and he mentioned for the first time I've heard, startups that help people to leave their country, like to basically divorce themselves from that. That as we get decentralized and we see the rise of cryptocurrency and other tools, we could get to this sort of balkanized world where you just say, I give up. I'm going to go somewhere else because I think I can do better on my own. And all of a sudden we're back to the 1000s with sort of rampant feudalism and no consistent issues there. Do you think we're going to see people like governments forced to compete with the alternative of the abandonment?
I think that's already happening. I just don't think governments realize it yet. Companies have been doing jurisdiction shopping for eons, like forever, really, but particularly over the last few decades. So a company will jurisdiction shop for whichever jurisdiction gives it the greatest opportunity for it to succeed, which is why, companies move to wherever they can. People have started doing that as travel got really cheap, and more and more people started saying, well, you know what, I could move and work anywhere. So they started to jurisdiction shop to which country would give them the work opportunities. But what's happening now, and this is profound, and of course I've been living this the last couple of years, is you can work anywhere in the world and live anywhere else in the world. So what's going to start to happen is this real competition of people are going to want to do the work that brings them the most satisfaction and empowerment, and employers that don't provide them a condition under which they can do meaningful work they just won't work for. But then they're going to live somewhere that aligns to their values and their cultural needs, or just their quality of life, desires. And if you as a country don't provide both opportunities for great work, but also critically important opportunities for great quality of life, then people will simply move elsewhere.
It's a lot like Malka Older's book, only instead of everybody having a centennial sort of 100,000 people that vote for any government in the world, you just move to that place and then work for any company in the world. We do have a couple of questions coming in quickly, and I want to run through them. They're good conversations, and I don't want to end things too much. Have you noticed any dramatic differences between the Canadian and the New Zealand public service?
Every public service is really, really different. The key thing I've noticed is that every single public service that I've worked in anyway, in every country, thinks that every other country must be doing it so much better. So they actually talk themselves down. And so the challenge, I think one of the challenges we have is recognizing what we're good at and being aware of what we're not so good at, but not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Canada and New Zealand both share a commitment to the role of the public service as being a support mechanism for people to be able to live well. They both start from a perspective of human rights and digital rights, neither of which we have in Australia. Australia is a very punitive state, structure and function based on its history. And so it's been lovely working in Canada and New Zealand, which start from the premise that people are fundamentally good and how do we help them be better. Some of the other, Canada is very bureaucratic, but there is a huge appetite for change in Canada right now. And I'm missing it very much. For those that don't know, I left just a few weeks ago because for the question about how do I get up at 3 a.m., I did it for almost 2 years and my health started to decline is the simple answer. So I ended up having to choose to leave after we'd got the team set up and running at its pace and doing amazing work. And I miss the team very, very much. And if it wasn't for the hours, I would still be living living in Canada as well, but we'd still be working in Canada because it's the best place to do actual systemic transformation in the world at the moment, certainly in any of the Westminster-based countries. So New Zealand, because it largely... everyone was affected by COVID, of course, but New Zealand didn't have quite the pressures on it that a lot of other countries did, which means that its actual understanding of the problem space and the push to change hasn't been as strong. And so that's been a little interesting, walking into offices and people saying, oh, must be weird working remotely. Well, actually, everyone's working remotely in Canada. The entire workforce is virtual. They're like, oh, why is that? So it's been a different experience, but I do look forward to continuing to contribute to public sector reform and public service renewal, and I think at heart I'll be a public servant for the rest of my life now.
I'm looking at the chat, and most of the people clapping with emojis are people who've worked with and for you, who obviously feel the same way. Couple more quick questions. What advice do you have for folks who are trying to make space for empowered teams? Because trust is a key thing, but what's the way to get that going? How do we help senior leaders understand the things they need to do to help people feel trusted?
There's a couple of very practical things. Like, we can talk about culture all we like, and culture is a critical part of it, but making culture practical is one technique. So just getting agreement in your team, even if there's no culture statement or anything for your whole department, don't worry about it. In your team, what are the values we care about and what are the behaviors that will support that? And for my team, it's all, we got a whole culture statement, but a lot of it came down to just always trying to be the kindest, calmest person in the room. And that not only helps our team engage with others, it helps our team engage with itself. Because when you're dealing across multiple disciplines, it's absolutely critical to appreciate value and be kind and calm with each other. But the second thing, and this is, I can't talk this up enough, even though it sounds quite bureaucratic, is a little technique that I'm going to call proportional planning. If you've got $1 or if you've got $1 million, doesn't matter how much you've got, put 10% or put some percentage to the long value stuff. If you put 100% of your time and resource and budget and everything into just constant delivery, to just rapid, fast stuff, or into urgency, if you allow, just because your boss says, I want all hands on deck on this thing, doesn't mean you have to put all hands on deck on that thing. Always proportionally planning your time and your program so that your team are not 100% running on urgency all the time. That's at every one of our job. If you've got one person working for you or 1,000 people working for you, or even just within your own day, whatever you are doing, apply proportional planning and say to yourself, I know that I want to spend roughly, this is the thing that's most important to me, so I'm going to spend at least 50% of my time on it, regardless of the pressures that are put upon me. So proportional planning from the bottom up and from the top down, so that your programs are proportionally planned and so that your day is proportionally planned, is probably the most important thing, because you can have culture, you can have everything else in place, you can have permission, but if you don't have capacity, you have no chance of being able to think and to plan. Those two strategies would be my suggestions: culture and capacity.
It really does seem like it's so much about the balance here of, this idea of making time for knowledge work, thinking work, speculation, serendipity, whatever you want to call that. So I will end with this question. It came up in the policy pitch competition that we had. I regret staging both of those things side by side. But Sean Boots, his proposal was, instead of saying you've got a spending limit of $10,000 a year and then you have to go contract with someone for $10 million, there's this missing middle. And he said just making it that you could spend $10,000 a year instead of $10,000 would already make it different, change the landscape of the tools that you could use. It seems like that's the problem. You have $1 or $1 million. You have all hands on deck, or let's do lots of idle planning work. There's little respect for the middle. And it seems like that's where the best things get done. Projects have a greater chance of success because they're not too big, but also a wide range of impact because they're not too small. And we don't do that. We tend to solve for the it's like a well curve when it should in fact be a bunch of medium-sized things. Why do you think that is?
Well, you've just given me an interesting insight, maybe to myself. Maybe the reason I've been able to have a reasonable amount of success in driving change is because of being a lifelong Chan Buddhist. Middle path is what we're all about. Look, I think you need both. You can't iterate your way out of a paper bag. You can't iterate your way to a completely different, from a... your iterations will get you faster horses. Your iteration won't get you the spaceship.
Yeah, it'll solve for the local maximum, but not the global maximum.
Yeah, but at the same time, you need. So my suggestion is to have two things. First of all, you need a moonshot. You need your big vision, your light on the hill that you're working towards, because a clear vision, clear light on the hill, a clear moonshot means that every single person in every role will naturally converge their efforts and time and creativity towards your moonshot, right? But then getting to the moonshot can be iterative. So you can iterate your way towards something, but you can't iterate your way away from something, if that makes sense. And to your point, I think that large transformation programs can be very successful when they create the space for iteration. So one of the things I'm most proud of is in the team that we built in the DCD team that we built in Service Canada and ESDC, because we did exactly that. We managed to create a structure where we had the minimum viable capabilities, capacity, culture, structure, disciplines to do the job, and then we could engage and collaborate with others to scale and to expand. But we also worked in a product-based, iterative way internally to a common vision, and used our project office to be the interface between a highly productive team and the usual all of government sort of program management methods and mechanisms and project management methods and mechanisms. So creating that structure is really important for sure. But you also don't want to just beg for 10,000 every year. You want to have a bucket of money to within which to drive a big transformation for sure. But it also gets us back to getting away from project funding. We need to get towards service funding, towards purpose funding, towards mission-based funding, rather than project funding, which, you know, launch is done, is clearly the death of innovation.
Well, it's been an amazing journey. Obviously, I hope we continue to do it, but I remember not really knowing you, and Sam Johnson was like, you should meet Pia. She's pretty great. And, you know, we wound up on a stage in Ottawa, kicking off the first of the Fast Forward tracks and all that kind of stuff. It has been an amazing journey seeing you across many different countries, and you've had, I think, far more impact than even you know on so many people who tell me that they found this calling, or they retain their hope because of the way that you have been the light that they walk towards. So thank you on behalf of the whole sort of global digital transformation community. You've changed a lot of hearts and minds, and those people have gone on to change their societies. So thanks again for being a part of this whole thing.
Gosh, and now I'm probably going to go have a little cry, and I'm going to also just beg you all to please remember we can't put anyone on pedestals in this space. We are all part of one community, and I love working with all of you as we all change what is needed to be changed. So thank you for coming on that journey, and I'm delighted that we're all in it together.
Thanks again, Pia.